Hi, very good morning. I'm Dr. Janak Patel, MD General Physician. Today we'll be discussing on one of the another interesting topic in alimentary system. We call cirrhosis of liver. All these videos are for educative purpose. This is one of the topic which you will face in your everyday practice, quite common, as well as very frequently asked in your theory and very frequently asked even in your oral exams. Cirrhosis of liver, or we call hepatic cirrhosis. We'll be discussing under all the different headings as usual: definition, etiology, pathophysiology, clinical features, investigation, differential diagnosis, treatment and complications. Cirrhosis is basically a irreversible disorder. It is a diffuse disorder of liver characterized by complete loss of normal architecture, and this is because of hepatic cell necrosis, which is replaced by extensive fibrosis, and there is a regeneration of parenchymal nodules. You can explain in another way. It is a spectrum characterized by clinical manifestation that there is an irreversible chronic injury to hepatic parenchyma, that is hepatocytes, which is replaced by extensive fibrosis, and there is a formation of regenerative nodule. Once there is an extensive fibrosis, it is irreversible damage. If you prevent the hepatic necrosis, yes, you can reduce the amount of fibrosis. Basically, we can divide into 4 different groups. There are many other ways you can divide. The most common cause of cirrhosis is secondary due to alcohol. It is also called as a Lennox cirrhosis. It is second most common is secondary due to hepatitis, we call post-necrotic cirrhosis. It can be because of obstruction to the biliary passage, we call biliary cirrhosis, or secondary due to congestive liver, which ends up with cirrhosis we call as cardiac cirrhosis, very frequently seen in a chronic congestive heart failure. Good number of times we are not able to identify, we call that as a cryptogenic cirrhosis. Now we come across a very common group we call as a non-alcoholic fatty liver, ending up with cirrhosis. Second way of putting them into 3 different groups depending upon the gross appearance of liver, we call micronodular, macronodular and mixed. And depending upon the function wise, compensated, decompensated. And then we call as an end stage liver disease. Compensated, also called as an uncomplicated, meaning person has already developed a liver damage. He has already got fibrosis. There is a nodule regeneration. But symptom wise, person is asymptomatic. That we call as a compensated. And in decompensated, either because of portal hypertension or because of liver cell failure, person starts developing symptoms and signs, we call as a decompensated stage. And when it goes into the terminal stage, we call as an end stage liver disease. Means person is heading towards hepatic encephalopathy. Etiology wise, we know very well, most common, almost in 60 to 70% of the group of people, it is secondary due to alcohol. We call as a Lennox cirrhosis. Post-necrotic cirrhosis is very frequently due to hepatitis B, hepatitis C, and that accounts for 10% of the group. Obstruction to the biliary passage is very frequently because of obstruction to the biliary tree. We call it a biliary cirrhosis, which is accounting for 5 to 10%. In case of a chronic congestive heart failure, we call it a cardiac cirrhosis. There is one small group we call as the Indian childhood cirrhosis. And then we put another group we call cryptogenic, where it is difficult to identify the exact cause of cirrhosis. We call it the cryptogenic cirrhosis, which is accounting for 10 to 15%. And one of the group we call as a non-alcoholic fatty liver or NAFLD, which ends up with cirrhosis. That is now a big chunk of cirrhosis group. So you can divide into viral hepatitis, alcohol, two most common. This two accounts for a major group, almost major group. Then there are other groups we divide as a metabolic causes. One of the classical example, non-alcoholic fatty liver, which will end into NASH, we call it a non-alcoholic steatotic hepatitis. There is another metabolic group we call as a hemochromatosis, not very common, but you do come across, which can be genetic. Wilson disease is another group which is a copper metabolism. Hemochromatosis is iron overload. And there is another we call as alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. So this belongs to what we put them into a common group we call as a metabolic causes, out of which the non-alcoholic fatty liver is the most common. Another group is a drug induced. Very frequently, one of the most common drug which is very frequently used as a immunosuppression drug we call methotrexate, which is a direct toxic and increases the damage to the liver. Already if there is a damaged liver, it will increase the damage. So that is one another group we should keep it in mind. Then comes an odd group we call as a chronic autoimmune hepatitis, in which there are two big group, primary biliary cirrhosis and secondary biliary cirrhosis. And in secondary biliary cirrhosis, it is primary sclerosing cholangitis. These are some of the conditions which are responsible for liver cirrhosis. There are many more causes which can end up with cirrhosis. As usual, we have told you that LANAC or alcoholic fatty liver, which will be 60 to 70%. Viral hepatitis accounts for 20 to 25%. Biliary cirrhosis, which is including primary biliary cirrhosis or sclerosing cholangitis, which is accounting for 10 to 15%. Cardiac cirrhosis is accounting for 5%. Hemochromatosis is a small group, but this belongs to metabolic, which is 5 to 10%. Cryptogenic, usually now we call that as NAFLD, which ends up into NASH, and that is accounting for 10%. Then comes Wilson disease, which is rare. Alpha-1 antitrypsin is rare. Drug and toxins may end up with NAFLD. They are common. Now this particular group we call as NAFLD is a big chunk. We should pay attention, particularly obesity, cardiometabolic syndrome. Those particular are more prone to develop NAFLD, and even some of the drugs which can end up with fatty liver, and that we call as a non-alcoholic fatty liver disorder. Some other time we'll be discussing on NAFLD. Yes, we already divide into these four classical types of cirrhosis, and we call gross appearance or naked eye appearance. You can divide into micronodular, where the nodules are of small size, and macronodular, where the nodules are of a bigger size. And when you got a mixture of both macro as well as micro, we call as mixed variety. We know these two accounts for almost 80% of the group, 80 to 90% of the group, and there is a miscellaneous which includes drugs, etc. All that will lead to hepatocyte necrosis. Hepatocytes will try to regenerate, so there will be regenerating nodule, and in a necrosed hepatocyte they stimulate fibroblast, and there will be fibrotic scar tissue with regenerative nodules, and then we call that as cirrhosis. But what happens along with that? So if you go in little more detail, alcohol will produce acetyl hydrate, which will increase NADH production, which will end up with fatty liver. There will be also lipid peroxidase, which will end up with hepatocyte damage. And there will be NADH production, which will result into oxidative stress, and that will also end up with hepatocyte damage. These damaged hepatocytes will stimulate what we call as stellate cells, hepatic stellate cells, which will generate fibroblast, and it will end up with fibrosis. Also, there will be cytokines which will be playing a role, and there will be endotoxins which are liberated secondary due to ethanol will also play a role, and there will be inflammatory cell mediators which will damage hepatocytes, which will stimulate hepatic stellate cells, and then will end up with fibrosis. So once the fibrosis sets in, that will results into compression of the sinusoids, and secondary to that sinusoids compression, there will be increased pressure in the central venous side, which will elevate your portal venous pressure, and you start getting what we call as a portal hypertension. Portal venous pressure will be elevated, and once the portal venous pressure is elevated, there will be accumulation of fluid in the peritoneal cavity. We call that as ascites. There will be decreased venous return from spleen to portal system, that will lead to splenomegaly, enlarged spleen, and fluid backup, as well as you will have a blood from portal venous system flowing through portosystemic shunts, which is at the level of esophagus, at the level of umbilicus will produce caput medusa, at the level of esophagus it will produce esophageal varices, and when the pressure in the esophageal varices rises, it can produce esophageal variceal bleed, and that can be lethal. Secondary to portosystemic shunts, there is a renal vasoconstriction, decreased renal blood flow, decreased GFR, and can end up into hepatorenal failure. This is in short we call as pathophysiology. You can end up with ascites, you can have a hepatosplenomegaly, and secondary to hepatosplenomegaly, you can have a hypersplenism, which can end up with a pancytopenia. You will have a liver which will be shrunken. You will have a portal venous pressure being elevated. Portocaval shunt or portosystemic shunt will be there. At the level of esophagus, esophageal varices. At the level of umbilicus, dilated veins around the umbilicus, we call as a caput medusa. At the lower end of the rectum, you have got hemorrhoids, or we call piles. All these are secondary due to increased portal venous pressure, and portal venous pressure will result into fluid filtration into peritoneal cavity. We call that as ascites. These are all secondary due to portal hypertension, and because of decreased liver function, because there is a damage to hepatocytes, number of hepatocytes are reduced, they are replaced by fibrous tissue. There is a regeneration of hepatocytes, but it is less than what are being damaged. So there is a detoxification of a toxic material will be reduced, and that can end up with hepatic encephalopathy. There is a decreased estrogen metabolism that will result into increased estrogen level, and secondary to increased estrogen level, you will have a gynecomastia, spider nevi or spider angiomata, which is very frequently seen in the infraclavicular region, and they are dilated small capillaries. Those are called spider nevi or spider angiomata. Person will have a increased redness in the palm, we call palmar erythema. So these three are the common finding because of the increased estrogen level in the blood: gynecomastia, spider nevi, and palmar erythema. Now, because of decreased hepatocytes, decreased bilirubin uptake. So because of decreased bilirubin uptake, the unconjugated bilirubin will be increased in the blood, and that will end up with jaundice. and you will have a decreased bilirubin conjugation, so you will have a less amount of conjugated bilirubin, and that will be a classical picture in a case of a hepatic damage. That is, unconjugated bilirubin will be high, conjugated bilirubin level will be low. Because of damage to the liver, albumin production is reduced. Secondary to decreased albumin production, person will develop hypoproteinemia, or we call hypoalbuminemia. And because of decreased hypoalbuminemia, the person will develop ascites as well as lower limb edema. Because of decreased production of clotting factor, there are good number of clotting factor which are manufactured by liver, and one of the clotting factor is fibrinogen, and so there will be decreased coagulative function, and that will give rise to bleeding tendency, easy bruising, subcutaneous bleeding, etc. So all this we already explained, so I am skipping this slide. That alcohol will be converted into acetaldehyde, which will be giving rise to fat storage, diversion of metabolism to fat storage. Oxidation of ethanol will produce NAD to convert it into NADH, and that will increase the peripheral release of fatty tissue, and there will be increased inflammation. Fibrosis will and sets in, the collagen synthesis will increase, and you will have a micronodular cirrhosis. So alcohol usually, or Lennox cirrhosis, will end up with micronodular. Other causes of hepatocyte damage, you will have a collapse of hepatic lobules, formation of fibrous septa, nodular regrowth, hepatic structure will be altered, portal blood flow will be altered, and you will end up with a portal hypertension along with cirrhosis. So liver fibrosis, portal hypertension will end up with ascites, abdominal varices, particularly at the level of esophagus, hemorrhoids at the level of rectum, esophageal varices, and at the level of umbilicus you will have a caput medusa. You will have decreased production of albumin as well as increased portal venous pressure, will end up with edema. And from esophageal varices you can have a bleeding because of increased pressure in the venous system, as well as the chance of bleeding tendencies because of the decreased coagulative factors. Spleen drains into portal vein as the pressure in the portal vein is reduced or increased. Spleen cannot drain completely into the portal venous system, and that will produce splenomegaly, and secondary to splenomegaly you can get a hypersplenism, and secondary to hypersplenism you can have anemia, thrombocytopenia, leukopenia, and secondary to that you will have a, because of thrombocytopenia, bleeding tendency, because of leukopenia, infection, and delayed wound handling. This will be the typical picture what you can come across, and anemia can produce weakness, fatigue, etc. Decreased ADH metabolism will result into accumulation of fluid, that is edema. Decreased estrogen metabolism will result into hyper estrogen level, and that will produce pulmonary erythema, testicular atrophy, spider nevi, gynecomastia, loss of body hair, as well as in female menstrual changes. Decreased metabolism of carbohydrates, fat metabolism, you will have a decreased plasma level of carbohydrates, protein synthesis, and that will end up with edema and ascites. Because of decreased storage of glycogen in liver at the time of a stress, decreased Glucose output from liver can produce hypoglycemia. Vitamin K absorption is reduced, and that will decrease certain coagulative factors which are vitamin K dependent, and that will have a bleeding tendency. Decrease bile, clay colored stool, because there will be no stercobilinogen formation. Bilirubin excretion in urine will be increased. You will get dark colored urine. Bilirubin metabolism is altered. You will have a increased hyperbilirubinemia because unconjugated bilirubin is not picked up by hepatocytes. So indirect bilirubin level will be elevated, and bilirubin cannot be converted into conjugated bilirubin. Hence the conjugated level of bilirubin is reduced. Secondary to obstruction to the biliary tract, now person will start developing obstructive element, and then he can have a clay colored stool. And because of elevated level of bilirubin, person will have jaundice. Now liver cell failure will produce inability to metabolize ammonia. So ammonia level in blood will be elevated, which will be circulating and which will enter the CSF, and you will get hepatic encephalopathy. There will be increased serum ammonia level that will produce sedation of the brain function. So person will have drowsiness, less irritable. There will be peculiar smell. It is called fetor hepaticus. Person will start developing flaps, or we call asterexis. There will be associated respiratory acidosis because respiratory rate is reduced, and all this will have decreased brain function, or we call alteration in level of consciousness, and person can go into a stage of what we call as a coma, and if not treated, person can have even a very high mortality, that is death. These are the two diagrams showing you. If the size of the nodule is more than 3, we call as a macronodular. If the size is less than 3, we call as a micronodular. Alcoholic, very commonly micronodular, while other causes can produce macronodular. And in good number of conditions, you can have both type of nodules in the same, then we call that as a mix. Now secondary to portal hypertension, you can see that the drainage from the spleen can be reduced. So we'll be showing you in this diagram. Normally blood is flowing in this direction, but once the portal pressure is increased, you can see now the blood will be flowing from portal venous system through this to the esophageal vein leading to esophageal varices, will flow back to spleen, will produce splenomegaly and hypersplenism, and will be also flowing towards the umbilical vein producing caput medusa. So this will be the effect of portal hypertension. So normally the blood which is flowing from the colon into a portal venous system, even in this the venous dilatation will take place, and that can produce hemorrhoids. So cirrhosis will end up with portal hypertension, which can produce varices and can bleed, varicose hemorrhage, ascites, and secondary to ascites, person can go into complication we call it spontaneous bacterial peritonitis, and because of increased abdominal pressure, the renal blood flow is reduced, and person can go into hepatorenal shutdown, or we call hepatorenal syndrome. And because of decreased liver function, decreased ammonia metabolism, ammonia level is increased, and person can develop encephalopathy. There are many other toxic substances which can also circulate and can contribute to encephalopathy. And because of bilirubin metabolism being affected, person will have jaundice. Secondary to portal hypertension, we have already told you portosystemic shunt will develop. You will have varices. Varices can bleed and can aggravate chance of hepatic encephalopathy. Also, the toxic material which are not metabolized by liver can bypass through postosystemic shunt and can aggravate hepatic encephalopathy. Also, you can have a blood which can flow from liver into pulmonary, and you can end up with what is called as a hepatopulmonary syndrome. There is increased planchnic blood flow. There will be hypotension, activation of RAS system, sodium and water retention, and can also contribute to ascites. And secondary to ascites, we already showed you that it can end up with hepatorenal syndrome. These are all the mechanisms what can take place in portal hypertension. So secondary to portal hypertension, you can develop esophageal varices, splenomegaly, hypersplenism, hemorrhoids, ascites, and at the level of umbilicus, caput medusa. So ascites can be due to portal hypertension, hypoproteinemia, or we call hypoalbuminemia, which will decrease serum oncotic pressure, lymphatic obstruction. Even hyperaldosteronism will be contributing to some extent to ascites, because secondary to increased level of aldosteronism, you will have an increased sodium and water retention at the level of kidney. And also it is said that because of increased nitric oxide level, you can have an increased vasodilatation. At the level of esophagus, depending upon the size of varices, you can have a complication. Larger the size of varices, the chances of bleeding are more, and that bleeding can lead to multiple complications like hemorrhagic shock, massive hematemesis, and person can also end up into what we call as hepatic encephalopathy. So ascites in cirrhosis can be secondary due to portal hypertension, which can end up with vasodilatation, increased planchnic pressure, lymph formation is reduced, formation of ascites, arterial underfilling, activation of vasoconstrictor, and anti-natriuretic factors, sodium retention, plasma volume expansion, and further aggravates ascites. There is activation of RAS system also. There is also hyperaldosteronism is playing a role. Hypoproteinemia is also playing a role. So there are multiple factors. Even nitric oxide is playing a role by producing vasodilatation. So hypoproteinemia, nitric oxide, decreased extracellular fluid, RAS system activation, hyperaldosteronism, antidiuretic hormones, etc. All these are playing a role. Even lymphatic obstruction, all these play a role in development of ascites. So this is a diagram which shows you multiple different ways in which this is lymphatic pathway which can end up with ascites. This is leakage of plasma, vasoconstriction can end up with ascites. Collateral venous development, sodium and water retention, secondary to increased aldosterone production can end up with ascites, and decreased metabolism or aldosterone can also end up with what we call as ascites. So there are multiple factors which are playing a role, and we already told you decreased metabolism of ammonia, so increased level of ammonia, and that can bypass through photosystemic shunts and can enter into CSF and can produce hepatic encephalopathy. And during hepatic encephalopathy, you will have an altered level of consciousness, asterexis, as well as ammonia can produce toxic side effects on multiple other organs also, decreasing the respiratory rate, etc., producing respiratory acidosis. And hepatic encephalopathy can be precipitated by electrolyte imbalance, diuretics, which is very frequently used for ascites. If a person gets vomiting, he will have a dehydration and electrolyte imbalance. Even diarrhea can precipitate by producing electrolyte imbalance and water imbalance. GI bleeding, secondary due to esophageal or gastric varices. Sometimes gastroduodenal erosion, or even because of Mallory-Weiss tear. This can aggravate because all this material will be metabolized in GI tract producing toxic products which will bypass the photosystemic shunt and can enter into systemic circulation and finally into CSF. Even alcohol withdrawal can also aggravate. Sedatives given to sedate the person can also aggravate. Any infection in the body can further aggravate. Spontaneous bacterial peritonitis, urinary tract infection, chest infection can aggravate hepatic encephalopathy. A person who gets constipation will have increased level of ammonia formation, can also aggravate. If a person is taking a large protein meal, because very frequently person has got hypoproteinemia, so high protein diet is advised. Secondary to high protein diet, person can also, because protein will be metabolized and the waste products of protein will be toxic because they are not completely metabolized, and they will be one of the factors which can aggravate hepatic encephalopathy. Now let us go through the clinical features. We can divide into two big groups. One, depending upon which part of the liver is damaged, that is hepatocellular failure. Secondary to hepatocytes damage, there will be hypoproteinemia which will produce malnutrition, low protein which will aggravate formation of ascites as well as lower limb edema. Clotting factor will be reduced which can precipitate bleeding, and there will be also chance of development of hepatic encephalopathy because it will depend upon the severity of the damage to the hepatocytes. While secondary to portal hypertension, you will have ascites, photosystemic shunts at the level of esophagus, esophageal and gastric varices, at the level of rectum, hemorrhoids, at the level of umbilicus, caput medusa, and also there are photosystemic shunts at the level of the kidney. Also splenomegaly, and splenomegaly will be producing hypersplenism. So there are two stages which are being described. We call compensated liver, where liver cirrhosis is there, but patient is asymptomatic. So already there is a cirrhosis, but liver is still compensating, and because of that compensation, person do not have any symptoms. So we call asymptomatic. But when the person starts becoming symptomatic, we call that person is decompensated. And depending upon the severity of the damage, person who are symptomatic can start developing serious complications. Then we call it a complicated stage of complications. We'll be going through some of those in brief. In short, because of liver failure, you can have a fetor hepaticus, which will happen because of toxic products, particularly ammonia. You will have a parotid gland enlargement, spider nevi, wasting of muscle because the protein manufactured by liver is reduced and you start developing hypoproteinemia. So muscle wasting will take place. Coagulative factors are not produced, so you start developing coagulopathy. You can have a purpura, you can have a ecchymosis, you can have a bleeding tendency, easy bruising, etc. Because of accumulation of ammonia, there will be increased effect on what we call as a basal ganglia, and that can produce asterexis, or we call liver flaps. Person will have a hypotension because of decreased blood volume. Because of increased estrogen level, gynecomastia, pulmonary erythema, testicular atrophy, and spider nevi. These are the common findings secondary due to hyperaldosteronism as well as secondary due to increased estrogen level. Mild edema is secondary due to hypoproteinemia, and there is a good amount of ascites which is because of portal hypertension, hypoproteinemia, nitric oxide factor, secondary to ADH level, secondary to hyperaldosteronism, also because of decreased lymphatic drainage. All this, there are multiple factors which is going to end up with ascites. So these are all the factors together which are working, as well as you will develop jaundice. These are all the factors which will be responsible for all these different clinical symptoms and signs. Secondary to ascites, when the pressure is markedly increased, you will have a hepatopulmonary syndrome and hepatorenal syndrome. And because of decreased hepatocytes function, there will be elevated bilirubin level, and that will give rise to elevated urinary urobilinogen, elevated indirect bilirubin, which will be elevated in blood, and person will start developing jaundice. And we have already told you, secondary to pulmonary hypertension, ascites, caput medusa, hemorrhoids. You can say even because of a tense ascites, person can have umbilical hernia, esophageal varices, splenomegaly, hypersplenism, which can end up with anemia, neutropenia, thrombocytopenia. Thrombocytopenia can aggravate bleeding. Neutropenia will have a chance of infections, and anemia will produce weakness, fatigue, etc. These are all the things which can happen secondary due to portal hypertension. Both combining together, there will be lot of symptoms and signs. Just I'm running through some of those we call as a jaundice, ascites, icterus, peripheral edema. Mechanisms are being explained. Easy bruising, pruritus very frequently, and this is because of retained bile salts. You will have a purpura, that is secondary due to thrombocytopenia because there is hypersplenism. There will be palmarerythema, and this is very frequently because of increased estrogen level and hyperaldosteronism. Hypoproteinemia will produce leukonychia, brittle nail. You can have a clubbing, particularly very frequently if the person is developing hepatocellular carcinoma, or we call as a hepatoma, and person will have a flaps, or we call as asterexis. This is secondary due to increased level of ammonia and hepatic encephalopathy. Caput medusa is because of the increased portal venous pressure. Hepatomegaly is not a common finding, but splenomegaly is a common finding. Gynecomastia is secondary due to increased estrogen level. Spider nevi is also because of increased estrogen level. And palmarerythema. Muscle wasting is because of increased catabolic stage and decreased albumin production by the liver. Xanthelasma is secondary due to cholestatic stage of the jaundice. Bronze diabetes can happen if the person has got hemochromatosis, secondary due to iron overload. So combining together, we have already mentioned all this finding: jaundice, ascites, caput medusa, splenomegaly, easy fatigue, pruritus, jaundice, edema, ascites, gynecomastia, palmarerythema, spider nevi, caput medusa, and hepatosplenomegaly. Usually in a classical cirrhosis, you don't get hepatomegaly unless the person has got other condition which increases the size of liver, like secondary metastasis or because of hepatoma, etc. Whatever we have discussed before is further shown. What are the CNS finding? What are the GI tract finding? Reproductive, skin, blood, metabolic, and cardiovascular. At your leisure time, you can go through all these are in detail explained. So you can go through this particular diagram. It is giving you the entire multiple different findings in different system. Same thing. Here it is classified by what we call as a mechanism by which you get the finding. That is because of decreased metabolism of estrogen. So estrogen level is increased and ammonia level is increased. What it will produce? That is because of estrogen, hair thinning, because of ammonia, coma, pitter hepaticus. Spider nevi is because of estrogen, gynecomastia, palmarerythema, all is because of estrogen level. And small testes, that is testicular atrophy, and reduced pubic hair is all because of estrogen level. Because of hypoproteinemia, ascites, purpura, that is bleeding tendency because coagulative factors are defective, and edema. Excretory failure will produce jaundice because bilirubin cannot be converted into conjugated and thrown out. So you will have a level of indirect bilirubin being elevated. Because of portal hypertension, what will be the findings? So this is pathophysiologically explained. This is compensated group, decompensated group, and this is in general what are the findings. So these are different slides which is showing you the different patterns. This is according to the system. This is in general from top to bottom. What are the different findings? This is pathophysiologically explained what will happen. This is in a compensated state, decompensated stage. In a decompensated stage, you will have a more of hepatic coma findings that is being explained here in a decompensated stage. This is in a compensated stage. What you can, person will be asymptomatic, but on examination, you will have some of the findings. These are all the pictorial view by which it has been shown. You can see a massive bleeding, angular. This is what we call as a Wilson disease, having a golden yellow ring. This is chelosis, jaundice, xanthelasma. This is pigmentation, glossitis. This is parotid gland enlargement. This is classical, that golden yellow ring, anemia, jaundice, etc. This is telangiectasia. This is easy bruising, can end up with bleeding. This is clubbing. This is leukonychia. This is palmarerythema. This is spider nevi. This is debutyrine contracture. This is koilonychia. You can have clubbing. Koilonychia will be very common in the person who is having iron deficiency anemia because of a chronic blood loss. This is caput medusa. This is edema. This is gynecomastia. This is debutyrine contractures. This is again a slide showing a debutyrine contractures. This is called prayer sign, odd sign. In some of the book it may be mentioned. In a Wilson disease, you will have a CNS finding, golden yellow ring, or also called as a Kesher-Fleischer ring. You will have a congestive heart failure, cardiac arrhythmias, kidney will be involved, bone will be involved. You will have a increased hemolysis. You will have a hepatomegaly, jaundice. You can have a fulminant hepatic failure, portal hypertension, etc. can be seen in Wilson disease. It is a copper metabolic disorder. This is the finding which can be seen in a Wilson disease, that is abdominal pain, swollen abdomen because of the ascites, weight loss, nausea, vomiting, jaundice, itchy skin, etc. And you know that there are multiple complications. Some of the complications you can have portal hypertension, and secondary to portal hypertension we already mentioned many things. Then hepatic encephalopathy, ascites can end up with spontaneous bacterial peritonitis, hepatorenal syndrome, hepatopulmonary syndrome, etc. So these are all the different complications which can occur: esophageal and gastric varicose bleeding, hepatic encephalopathy, spontaneous bacterial peritonitis, hepatocellular carcinoma, hepatorenal syndrome, hepatopulmonary syndrome, portal venous thrombosis, and even person can die. And you can see that person right from confusion can go into coma. When he's in a stage of coma, we call stage 4, and when he starts having stage of confusion, we call stage 1 of hepatic encephalopathy. I'm not going into detail regarding hepatic encephalopathy. At your leisure time, you can go through. As far as investigations is concerned, most important is liver function test, liver biopsy, liver scan, and ultrasound. Also, you can go for esophageal endoscopy, prothrombin time, examine stool for occult blood to find out esophageal varicose bleed. Additional tests like abdominal X-ray, upper GI series, angiography, abdominal CT, esophageogastroduodenoscopy, we call as a upper GI endoscopy, liver biopsy, and nuclear scan. These are all the things depending upon what stage you are examining. So right from complete hemogram, peripheral smear, platelet count, PT-INR, these are all will be useful to find out the liver function, serum bilirubin, serum protein, globulin level, SGPT, SGOT, alkaline phosphatase. Alpha fetoprotein is readily required when you suspect alpha fetoprotein deficiency, alpha trypsin deficiency we call. Sorry, alpha fetoprotein will be for a hepatocellular carcinoma. Sorry. Then you can go for a blood sugar examination which will suggest you the amount of liver damage, because you can get hypoglycemia when there is a very bad damage to the liver. Urea creatinine will be very helpful to find out the severity of the renal damage. Sodium potassium imbalance can occur because of multiple reasons like diuretic, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, etc. Ascitic fluid examination to find out, rule out spontaneous bacterial peritonitis. Ultrasound, CT abdomen, and liver biopsy is by and large not required unless you are suspecting some of the disorders like hemochromatosis, malignancy, etc. So ideally biopsy is the gold standard, but it is not needed. You can clinically suspect and laboratory parameter can identify, and you can go for what we call as a fibroscan, which can give you an idea regarding the cirrhosis. To find out the liver function, platelet count, AST, ALT, ALP, GGT, albumin level is useful. Bleeding time. Then if you are suspecting post-viral hepatitis, you can go for a viral serology. In hemochromatosis, ferritin level. In Wilson, copper panel. And if you are suspecting alpha-1 antitrypsin, then you can go for alpha-1 antitrypsin level studies. And in ultrasound, mainly fibroscan is very, very helpful. There is something called as a Bonacini score, which is predictive tools using platelet count, ALT, AST, and INR. That is a useful score. You can divide this into blood test, sonography, radiological study, and MRI. I'm not going into detail. So, if a patient comes with a chronic liver disease, always look for variceal bleeding, ascites, and hepatic encephalopathy. If clinically you get enlarged hepatic lobes, there is a splenomegaly, and there is a stigma of chronic liver failure. If answer is no, then you go for a liver biopsy and radiological study. If answer is no, you may go for a radiological study because you can have a small nodular liver. Intra-abdominal collaterals you can identify, you can look for ascites, splenomegaly, and also you can go for bone marrow examination. Liver biopsy is not commonly required, and usually liver biopsy will be needed in a case of, like say, hemochromatosis. It is diagnostic. Even in case of a Wilson disease, it will be useful, etc. In those group you may go for. So liver biopsy is not a common indication in a person with cirrhosis. If any person who comes to you with ascites, usually we go for some of the tests like we want to rule out spontaneous bacterial peritonitis. So we look for the protein level and we look for the cell count and culture. By and large, in a pure portal hypertension, we don't require ascitic fluid for paracentesis. In case of secondary infection, glucose level will be low, LDH level will be high. If it is secondary due to pancreatic disease like acute pancreatitis, your amylase level will be elevated. And in case of a malignant ascites, you can go for a cytological study to find out the type of malignancy. So paracentesis is useful in some of the conditions, particularly spontaneous bacterial peritonitis or secondary infections, pancreatic ascites, and to rule out malignant ascites. So indication of paracentesis is new onset of ascites. After admission to hospital, if a person starts developing symptom signs of spontaneous bacterial peritonitis, if there is a renal dysfunction, if there is unexplained encephalopathy, etc. Ideally, there is no contraindication for paracentesis, but before doing a paracentesis, you should do platelet count, BTCT and INR. And in ascites by the type of ascitic fluid, if it is a high gradient where you get SAG more than 1.1, you suspect cirrhosis. And if serum albumin to we call ascitic fluid level, if that particular is less than 1.1, it will be more going for tubercular peritonitis or we call as malignancy. So these two, high gradient and low gradient SAG value, is very helpful in case of what we call is a pericentesis. This is called portal hypertension related groups, and this is the what we call as secondary due to malignancy, tubercular peritonitis, we call inflammatory groups. Inflammatory groups, pancreatic ascites, all this will have a low gradient. Serum albumin to ascitic fluid. This is MRI which can be helpful. CT scan can be sometime helpful. Ultrasound is the most non-invasive technique which is very helpful and can be done at the bedside. In differential diagnosis, you will have to rule out alcoholic from hepatitis, biliary, drugs, Wilson disease, hemochromatosis and cardiac cirrhosis. These are the groups which you will have to differentiate. As far as the treatment part is concerned, usually we call as etiological treatment. So in a person who is having alcoholic cirrhosis, alcohol should be stopped. If person is having hepatitis B or hepatitis C, treatment for hepatitis B or C, if it is possible, it should be treated. Protective liver treatment should be given, so we call hepatoprotectors. If person is having ascites, treatment for ascites, treatment of varices, will be showing you some of the slides. If person is having jaundice, accordingly, treatment of portal hypertension and treatment of hepatic encephalopathy. These are all what we call as complications of ascites. This will be in a decompensated stage. Along with this, alcohol intake should be stopped. In case of non-alcoholic fatty liver, control of obesity, control of diabetes mellitus, control of cardiometabolic syndrome, drug toxicity, etc. should be treated or controlled. What we do for that? By and large, we require all this treatment to see that the person from a decompensated stage, because by giving a treatment, if you can shift the person from a complicated stage or stage of complication to compensated stage where complications are reduced, you give benefit to the person. In diet, sodium restriction, increase carbohydrate, moderate fat, increase protein, but protein should be restricted if the person is heading towards encephalopathy. Fluid restriction, vitamin supplementation, all these medications should be used with caution, like diuretic, electrolyte replacement, antacids. Lactulose is useful to remove ammonia by having a regular motion. Neomycin is to prevent a bacterial flora to decrease the breakdown products of protein metabolism. Levodopa is very frequently utilized to repair the damaged neurotransmitter substances, etc. But the gold standard in case of cirrhosis is liver transplantation. So prevention is done in case of hepatitis B and C by giving antiviral drugs, alcohol, abstain from alcohol, NASH, control of weight and treatment of obesity, hemochromatosis and chelatus. The ideal treatment is liver transplant for any cirrhotic patient, and treatment of complications, say like in case of portal hypertension, which is ending up with esophageal varices, beta blocker, nitrates, terlipressin, surgical ligation, we call as bending, etc. And if a person is heading towards hepatic encephalopathy, lactulose, enemas, antibiotics, etc. In ascites, symptomatic relief by salt restriction and diuretics. These are some of the common tics we call. So if a person is having sodium and water retention, diuretic will be helpful. In case of ascites, large volume paracentesis, and if the person is having hypoproteinemia, albumin can be given. Tips will help to reduce the portal pressure by diverting the blood flow from portal system directly into the cable system. This will be trans intrajugular portocable shunt. And then peritoneo venous shunt can be also utilized. So in an acute varicose bleeding, resuscitation, endoscopy, we call endoscopic treatment for esophageal varices. Then pharmacotherapy you can utilize like vasopressin, nitroglycerin, beta blocker, clonidine, etc. You can also use somatostatin or octreotide, balloon tamponades, and finally tips. And even you can go for portocable shunt surgery. So this is again a chart which is showing you that if there is no varices, what you do. If there is a small varices, no bleeding. If there is a medium to large varices, still if there is no bleeding. And once the person gets bleeding, then you can go for endoscopic treatment, tips, etc. So this is a chart which is showing you. It is in detail. If you are interested, you can go through your leisure time. By and large, it is said that of varicose bleeding, once a person develops cirrhosis, the chances of portal hypertension will increase, and in that almost 35 to 80% will develop esophageal varices. Out of this particular group who develops esophageal varices, 25 to 40% develops esophageal bleeding, and of this person 30 to 50% will die because of massive bleeding, hemorrhagic shock, and hepatic encephalopathy. Of this 50 to 70% will survive, and of those person who survives, 70% will have a chance of rebleeding, because portal hypertension, if it is not controlled, the chances of rebleeding will be always there. And one of the thing during acute bleeding, you can take an advantage of Sangstein Blackmore tubes, which is having a, this is what we call as a gastric bulb, this is esophageal bulb. I am not going into detail. So gastric bulb is inflated in the gastric part, and esophageal bulb is inflated into esophageal area. Because this is a very big long topic, so I am not going through in detail. Some other time we can discuss. There is another way of doing what we call as a treatment for esophageal varices, is called as a endoscopic ligation. This is endoscopic ligation, or we call bending. You can see that this esophageal varices is ligated and bended, so that is called ligation and bending. You can go for sclerotherapy, so you inject the drug into esophageal varices which will shrink and get fibrous. And you can go for TIPS, that is transjugular intrahepatic portosystemic shunt. So blood from a portal vein will now enter directly into hepatic vein, and that will divert the blood flow from portal system into what we call as a inferior vena cava, and that is called as portosystemic shunt. But because of this, the non-toxic products can easily move, but toxic products which are non-toxifieds, toxic products usually are converted into non-toxic by liver, but because of cirrhosis, toxic product cannot be metabolized, and those toxic products without metabolism will enter into circulation, and one of those material is ammonia, and so ammonia will directly enter into photosystemic circulation, and person will be more chance for hepatic encephalopathy. This is a surgical treatment showing you in diagrammatic view. You can have a different modes of treatment. This is end-to-end, end-to-side portocable shunt. This is splenorenal shunt. This is mesocable shunt, etc. There are multiple different modes which are being there. As far as ascites is concerned, there is something called as a LVP, large volume paracentesis, TIPS, and last result in a case of refractive ascites is liver transplant. This is large volume shunt, means at a time you remove a good quantity of fluid, right from 5 liters or more during a single session. But when you remove this, there is always a chance of getting lot of complications. So always you should pay attention to those complications while subjecting a person to large volume paracentesis. There is another variety that is called peritoneovenous shunt, where because of a one directional valve, unidirectional valve, fluid from the peritoneal cavity will be diverted to what we call as an internal jugular vein, and this is also called as a Levine shunt. So to jugular vein, and by and large this is a relatively safe. In case of spontaneous bacterial peritonitis, you will have to give antibiotics. Some of the time culture negative, but lot of neutrophils, you will have to give antibiotics. And when there is a polymicrobial, you will have to give antibiotics with anaerobic coverage. And in a monomicrobial, again 5 days antibiotic is necessary. Hepatic encephalopathy, you will have to see that what are the precipitating factors. One of the precipitating factor is excessive protein, so you will have to stop this. TIPS is another one. Infection, GI bleed, sedatives, diuretic which produces hypovolemia, electrolyte imbalance, as well as it can precipitate kidney failure, and secondary to ascites also person can have a hepatorenal shutdown. These are all the different precipitating factors you should avoid as much as possible. Most important material which is being commonly utilized is lactulose, which will increase stool, and because of which the ammonia formation is reduced. So urease producing bacteria are removed, and that will decrease the chance of hepatic encephalopathy. And in a person with a hepatic encephalopathy, there are certain products like ornithine aspartate and benzoate which will help to reduce the chance. Lactulose, the antibiotic which are not metabolized by GI tract and which are not absorbed from GI tract, like neomycin, should be utilized, and protein restriction should be done. As far as complications of cirrhosis is concerned, we have already mentioned lot of complications before, but in short we are mentioning again, that is portal hypertension, gastroesophageal varices which can end up with bleeding, we call hematemesis. Portal hypertensive gastropathy is quite common. Splenomegaly will produce hypersplenism and chances of bleeding tendency. Secondary to portal hypertension, ascites, and ascites will have a very high chance of spontaneous bacterial peritonitis, and also it will be one of the factors which will be responsible for the hepatorenal syndrome. Also, because of all these complications, chances of hepatic encephalopathy is quite common. Secondary to portal hypertension, you can have a hepatopulmonary syndrome, portopulmonary hypertension, hepatic hydrothorax. Secondary to hepatocyte function is being reduced, malnutrition, hypoproteinemia, and secondary to splenomegaly, hypersplenism, you got anemia, you got a neutropenia, chances of infection becomes high, and thrombocytopenia, chances of bleeding will be high. Because of decreased protein level, malnutrition, there will be muscle wasting, chances of sepsis will be more, and because of neutropenia, chances of sepsis will be more. Because glycogen storage are reduced, hepatocytes functions are affected, chances of hypoglycemia being high, and one of the odd complications, that is hepatocellular carcinoma, is also commonly seen in a person with cirrhosis. Other complications like coagulopathy because of factor deficiency, fibrinolysis, and thrombocytopenia. Even a bone will have a effect secondary due to calcium metabolism, that is osteopenia, osteoporosis, osteomalacia. And we already mentioned secondary to hypersplenism, anemia, thrombocytopenia, neutropenia, and occasionally you can even have hemolysis. So I end my lecture here. I thank you all for taking out time. I know that your time is valuable and I appreciate you for spending some of the time with me. I think this lecture will be helpful to you in your everyday practice as well as in your final exams, in your oral exams. This lecture is mainly for educative purpose, but it will be helpful to you, that is the fourth year students. So I hope this lecture will be helpful. If you like this lecture, please press button, like button, and subscribe, and also press bell icon. I'll be putting some of the other lectures according to your requirement, and we see you in the next lecture.